everyone to Super Good Biz. This is the first episode of season 2, which I'm super excited by. So I want to introduce everyone to our guest, Victoria Jenkins. I actually forgot to ask you your pronouns, Victoria.
She, her.
Great. So she is the founder of Unhidden Clothing, a fashion brand centered in inclusive design and adapted fashion for people with disabilities. One thing that I read on the website that I thought was a really great explanation of what this means, and at least just kind of an intro, because Victoria will definitely explain more, but the company considers every condition and inability when designing our range, and we commit to learning and improving as we go. So that's the kind of person and creative and entrepreneur that we're talking to, and I'm so excited to welcome Victoria. So thanks for coming.
Yeah. Oh, what a lovely intro. You know, like I don't even remember writing that bit of that little thing, but it's that is very much what we do.
I'm a brand strategist by day, so those are the types of things that I pull in. So tell us a little bit about your story and why and how you started Unhidden Clothing, and if you want to tell us a little bit more about it.
Oh, of course. I mean, bear with me because I have to talk about like my career trajectory as well as my health. Like it's all the same thing now. So so I studied fashion design and then to an online retailer as a pattern cutter, which is sort of the person that makes the shapes that you cut out and sew together. It's probably the easiest way of explaining what that is. And then in that role, I kind of fell into being what's called a garment technologist. And that's where you look at the fit, the construction. And then I worked for Jack Wills, then All Saints. And then my last permanent job was at Victoria Beckham. And then I'll go back to my medical side of things. And basically I'd always had, I think even since, my whole life, I've always sort of been a fussy eater or had weird stomach issues. But in my early 20s, I was back and forth to the doctors a lot with a lot of, it was just IBS, it's women's troubles, it's stress, oh, you work in fashion, that's what it is, which was not very helpful until I had an undiagnosed stomach ulcer that burst and threatened my life in 2012. So I had life-saving surgery because I also have a dangerously high tolerance for pain. So I waited 48 hours before I went to A&E. And because I walked in, initially they were sort of like, it's probably not that bad until they did an x-ray. And then, I remember seeing people like running out of the room and just assuming it was somebody else's emergency. And then my mum was like, no, you are the emergency. I was like, oh, okay. But I was still texting my friend, like, I don't think I'll be at work on Monday. So yeah, daft also, like not very good sense of self-preservation. And then that led to multiple other things being diagnosed. I have a paralyzed stomach, I've had my gallbladder removed, I have 2 exits now from my stomach because it's paralyzed. What else have I had out? I've had loads of other things done, and just they've all kind of slowly sort of took me down that path into what I've only really embraced in the last 4 years of sort of using the word disabled. It used to just be, chronic health. So now we get back to where the two things line up. So I was in hospital in 2016, one of my yearly 10-day stays. And a woman on the same ward as me, she had survived ovarian cancer, but she had a lot of other conditions as a result of the treatment. So she had 2 stomas, which is when your stomach is put through your stomach wall, so that's how you go to the bathroom, essentially. So she had 2 of those. She also had a line in her arm, and she was there to be fitted for one in her chest. And she had obviously a lot going on, so she had a lot of doctors, but she just had, like 6 doctors come around 3 times a day, and she had to take all of her clothes off every single time. And just to access her own body, it was a t-shirt or a hospital gown, and that was it. But she actually, despite a lot of assumptions, she worked. She had an office job, and she couldn't dress nicely for that. And she knew that I worked in fashion because it was when I was working at Victoria Beckham, so we were talking about it. And she just said, I can't dress like that for work, And it was just this kind of like a resigned, there's no option unless I want to be in pain or uncomfortable. So instead, I'm just going to every day feel like I can't dress up. And it was just, initially I was like, that's ridiculous. It exists. I'm going to go and find it. So I started researching from my bed. I was like, oh yeah, no, it's not really a thing, is it? Or, you know, the more I looked, obviously over the, you know, the days and weeks after that, that, you know, there are a few brands, especially in the States, there's a lot. Tommy Hilfiger's done a lot. Mindy Shire of Runway of Dreams. That was actually the year before in 2015. And now I actually speak to Mindy, which is absolutely incredible. Just how it's all come round. She's amazing. But yeah, there just wasn't anything from somebody in the UK who had studied fashion, that didn't look medical and wasn't aimed at like the elderly. And of course, never mind sustainable, like 5 years ago, that wasn't a thing either. So yeah, the idea wouldn't leave. So I made the decision to quit at Victoria Beckham and pursue it. But then obviously I had to go freelance to pay rent and so on and just live. And that ended up taking up all of my time again. So it wasn't until last year that actually we launched the website, had our photo shoot in September of last year, and it was meant to be just photos for a Kickstarter. And then I love the photos so much, I thought, well, actually, why don't we do made to order? Because actually that makes more sense anyway. I also use the word we a lot. It's me. And two stakeholders who are friends, but you know, it's me. And yeah, so here we are now. Yeah, it's been 9 months.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
quite a long explanation.
no, it was a story. No, it wasn't long. It was great. And it was great to just hear how you were explaining how you realized this about yourself and realize how this was affecting someone else. Is there one design element that you realized you had to do away with because it was something that, like, I'm thinking an example is like buttons or something like that. Was there one thing where you're like, we can't do this?
To be fair, I kept buttons on the men's shirts just at the top because we have an option. You can choose Velcro, poppers or magnets. Now the magnets we have, I wouldn't trust necessarily on a large breasted person, because we're using bamboo silk. If I was using something heavier, a heavier magnet would be fine, but because of the fabric choice, so I think snap fastenings are much better in that sense. Like the person doesn't have to worry as much. But yeah, buttons are a pretty big no. But saying that, there are incredible tools now. That I think there's a company, I'm trying to think who it is, and they've bought like a hack kit, an adaptive hack kit. I think it's being sold on Patty and Ricky. And it's this gadget that you put it it's quite big, so even with reduced dexterity, you push it through the buttonhole and then clasp it over the button and then just pull it through. I was like, oh damn, I could do with that. That would save me hours, you know.
Yeah.
I do all the time. I'm like, and especially if you are a bit juddery or you're nervous or it's tight, like I have days where buttons are not my friend, and I thought, great, so then that makes even non-adaptive clothing fine. But generally I think buttons they're not going to be a huge part of anything we ever do. There's so many.
Wow.
You can go into it and just go into zips. Okay, and then you look at fabric choices themselves. Like you can't have really slippy, shiny, satiny things for wheelchair users because they slide around in it and it's really uncomfortable and it can all bunch up. And then even just the fact that, like, when we sit down and you've got a jacket on and you lean back, imagine being sat down with everything that bunches up around you in a day. And you're like, oh yeah, don't need any of that there. So there's some really clever, beautiful, and I hope to be able to do some myself. Like, they look like a blazer from the front, but the back is essentially cut out, but it's it allows them to move, and it can also be put on from the front backwards as well as from the front, from the back to the front. So many things. Dignity's always been the sort of what I'm really trying to push for. It's so many people, and it's no one's fault, but we do take for granted. You need a pair of pants, you can go and buy a pair of pants. You need a bra, you can go and buy a bra. You need an outfit for a wedding, you can go and buy one. And then somehow we've neglected this huge community of people, 1 billion globally. I think it's actually grown to the point now, some people say it's the 15%, but actually it's more accurately probably the 20%, which is really quite a lot of people. And just, they can't even get underwear to wear, so they can't put underwear on, then they can't put trousers or skirts or dresses on. So how do they leave the house? How do they get a job? It is a basic human right. And we just I don't, the problem is now, I don't think the fashion industry has an excuse anymore. They know the spending power, they know the amount of people, they know exactly all of that. They know what they set to gain by including us. And every day they choose not to.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't be part of that system anymore, which is also the reason for saying, no, do you know what? I can't see it, so I'm going to do it. The problem though, is people with disabilities, they don't really actually want to have specialized clothing brands for them. They want brands that exist to do it. And I completely understand. The problem is they're not. So until they all catch on, there's a lot of us that really, really care. And we're doing it from a genuine place of wanting to help and feeling that it should be there. So I don't know how it's going to happen. Like, I do believe that they're going to start, but yeah, I just don't think there's an excuse for it. And, you can't say that we're all pushing for equality when some of us can't even get dressed.
Right. Oof, that was powerful. I was gonna say, like, why isn't the fashion industry, apparel, accessories, anything like, why aren't they designing apparel to be accessible? Like, what is their hurdle or the problem that they have?
I think there's a few things. So I think, firstly, the unit price is obviously going to cost more because you are using more trims, but they have access to loads of trims, so that's a really poor excuse. I think the next one is they don't hire people with disabilities. I know damn straight, if I'd been a wheelchair user, I wouldn't have got any of these jobs. I know I wouldn't. I would have been able to get in the building. So if they're not seeing it, how are they going to consider it? Then on top of that, you think we're not teaching inclusive design in university. So students are going on, this old glamorous idea of fashion, going out into the world and, again, not seeing it. So generation after generation of designers that could really tackle it and not being considered. But also people with disabilities are not being consulted. They're not being talked to. Like the audacity of a fashion company using a disabled model and dressing them and not considering how that person's going to get dressed, and then thinking, maybe we could help. Like every time that happens, I'm just sort of astounded, every time I see them use anyone with a disability. And then, the amount of times I've seen them use someone in a jumpsuit. Now, that's probably the most difficult garment for anyone to wear. But when it comes to wheelchair users or people with stomas and catheters, of all the things to put a person with a disability in, a jumpsuit's not a good idea. So yeah, I think there's a language barrier. There's a fear because they don't know how to discuss it because they never have. And there's definitely that feeling of, like, we haven't ever done this. Like, how are we going to sort of bring this in? And I think it's a case of they've just got to get over it and start. But they have to do it by bringing in disabled consultants or disabled models, or people that can at least sort of be a focus group for them. If they're not going to hire a disabled designer, which there's far and few between of them, because a lot of, again, like fashion design students, I don't know very many that have a chronic health or a visible disability, because they don't have equal access to education either. So there's a lot of problems within, it's not any one thing, but I think a lot of it is fear and ignorance, and whether that ignorance is their fault or it's systemic is kind of everybody. But I think in this world of knowing, especially in this world of like diversity, equality and inclusion, and the amount of brands using the word diverse and not including disability, which happens literally daily. I see that happen now with different brands, and they think they're like, yay, we've included everybody. I'm like, no, you've missed out again. So you just have to keep, nothing's going to change unless someone sort of sticks their head up. And there's lots of us around the world that are doing adaptive design. So
yeah, tell us a little bit more about that. Diversity includes disabilities.
So that was by somebody in America called Melinda Martin, and she's got a media agency called Statement. And she just, we'd had a few conversations about digital ableism, but she basically, as well as a lot of us, have just noticed this sort of trend for brands to use the word diversity, and then just not be including disability, like in any way, shape or form, never mind visible disabilities, which is if we do represent disability, it's usually with a visible one, not an invisible one. And then, you know, you can get into the world of neurodiversity and learning disabilities and deaf and blind and all of those sorts of things, you know, things that you can't, I mean, the thing with disabilities, you can't tell by looking at someone if they're disabled or not. That's a very ableist narrative. So she just sort of got a lot of us together to sort of all say, we're going to share this post at the same time. And it was super powerful. And I know it made a lot of people think, because, you know, you can't have the conversation about diversity and not include the largest marginalized group in the world, because it's in every demographic. You know, if you want to champion Black Lives Matter, you know, disabled Black Lives Matter is actually a sort of a secondary, but equally as important thing, because, you know, once you introduce disability to any of the other marginalized groups, I mean, the stats are just awful. Mm-hmm. You know, like things get worse and worse and worse. So, yeah, it was just, yeah, it was kind of you either don't use that word, or if you're going to use that word, include disability.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to ask is what are we including in the word disability? And you had mentioned there's physical, there's mental, there's invisible disabilities that you can't see by looking at someone. And I think it's important to just note that and like take a pause and, you know, let people who are listening and learning perhaps for the first time, like understand that disabilities are probably affecting people around you and probably affecting your social circle or your friends or your family. And you might not have ever realized that. And there's, you know, even upon my own research that I was doing to learn more about this before our conversation, like saying the word disability or a person with disability is not a bad thing. That is just, you know, like, I think there's importance in honoring all of the variety that is in this, in, you know, this community, or, you know, in this community, but then also realizing how it can affect everybody, folks who have disabilities and folks who do not have disabilities, because that could affect my mother, it could affect my uncle, it could affect me, you know, like it kind of affects everyone. And designing not just fashion that's accessible, but a world and a society that's accessible to all people, and making diversity include all people of all abilities and everything like that. Like it makes the world more mindful and more thoughtful around how people are experiencing their day-to-day lives, and like how can we add more mindfulness, consciousness, like love and care for people, so that they don't have to be struggling to you know, do things that do give them dignity or happiness, or you know, a simple errand or something like that, going down the street.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's you know, when everything becomes inclusive and accessible and adaptive, and it's just a matter of course, there's then not going to be these people that suddenly, you know, go through a life-changing accident, for example, and suddenly they realize how, you know, it's traumatic to go through and realize when you've been non-disabled your whole life, and you then suddenly overnight, you know, for many of us that changes, and then you realize how inaccessible the world is. And there's very little, you know, there's not very much choice in anything, and if there is, it's really expensive. And then you look at, you know, the fact that I think it's like 44% of pension age adults are disabled. So it's kind of, you pretty much got a 50-50 chance of you will become disabled just by growing older. And then something I've seen this phrase a lot recently, and it's this whole, we shouldn't be trying to help people with disabilities because we're scared of becoming disabled. It should be because we want to help. And also because there is a very high chance that at some point, I mean, disability will touch everyone, whether it's indirectly or not. But, you know, even if you have, you know, if you break your leg, you know, people find very quickly how really difficult it is to get around on crutches or with a moon boot or just to travel. And then, you know, imagine that's your whole life. And, you know, that's like a physical idea of it. I think it's where it's really difficult with some of the things that I have wrong. It's kind of trying to say to someone, imagine having food poisoning every day for the rest of your life. What would you need to have changed in your, you know, what would you expect to happen and to change, and how would you expect to be treated? And it's something that you can't see. And, you know, yeah, it's I think it's just kinder to include everybody. And once it's done, we haven't got to do it again. You know, like once we make it normalized for everybody, then you lose a lot of the stigma and the shame and a lot of the narratives that just aren't helpful, you know. it's something that I hope will happen. I think we all in this community, we go through phases of it will happen and then it won't. I think the simplest thing everyone can do is ask. I mean, if you know you've got someone in your family or friend circle or at work, I think so long as they're comfortable talking about it and you ask them if they mind, ask questions. Like it's not that every single person with a disability wants to be an advocate and can even talk about everything, because some people with the same conditions I have probably wouldn't use that word to refer to themselves, and that's completely their decision and okay as well. And no one owes anybody their medical history. But I think if someone is talking about it and and they're talking about it with you, then the kindest thing and the easiest thing is to say, what are your access needs, or what accommodations, or what is it that I can do to make this easier for you. So an example is some of my friends know to phone a venue ahead and check if there's seating. And if there isn't, we either don't go to that venue, and this is no problem, they know that I know this, they don't invite me. If they know I can't go, they won't invite me along. It just means they might, try that bit harder to find somewhere where I can the next time. And I didn't know they'd been doing this. One of them told me about it, and I was like, oh, it meant so much to know they'd phoned ahead to this. I mean, admittedly, it was to a nightclub, which they're very easy on the seating. But they phoned ahead and they had it. So I went, and they all kind of took turns sitting with me. Ultimately, I found that more depressing than if I just wasn't there. But it was nice to be included, and that they thought enough to sort of look ahead. Like that was really, that's kind of what everybody wants, just to be considered and to be asked what we need.
Yeah, to have that not just awareness, but the respect and the care that comes with thinking about that. I was thinking about something you said, and it was the problematic narratives that exist. And earlier we were talking about just the power of language and how language can truly shift people's perspectives and also do away with some of the shame that comes from those problematic narratives. And maybe we don't need to talk about the problematic narratives, because then we're giving them too much weight and power.
It might highlight some of them, because I think some of them are really, really easy. So like once I tell you, you'll notice it and you'll see it and you'll realize. So kind of,
okay.
And I hadn't even realized this until a couple of films this year. So how quite often in films and media, if there's someone with a disability, they're a villain. So there's this kind of connotation between evil and deformity. Like there was this huge uproar with the Witches remake, because they gave the High Witch character pterodactyly, which is a limb difference. Now in the book she doesn't have those. In the first film, that's not part of it. They added that in. They added a disability in to make her more scary. And they didn't show it in any of the trailers. So I think they knew, like Warner Brothers, they knew what they'd done. But then, then it all came back, and they're now pairing with Lucky Finn and Anne Hathaway herself. She was, horrified and all of that. But it is a narrative you'll see. Like, it's a silly example, but you look at horror films, and it's always, what can they do to make them look awful? And they actually use existing conditions sometimes, and then you think, imagine that. And I think the problem that I really had with the Witches was, and I saw there's an incredible advocate over here called Shannon Crossland, and she just wrote "not a witch" on her arm. And a lot of people did that. And actually one of my brand ambassadors for Unhidden, she felt the same. And it was a case of all these children watching a children's film where a witch had maybe the same condition they do. And then these kids are going into playgrounds and kids calling them a witch. And you think, just that's when it doesn't even exist in the book or the original film, why add it in? What was the logic? And it was that was a big month, I think, for everybody. And they have apologized, and I mean, they haven't pulled the film, of course, but they have apologized, and they are working to be better. And there are, there's leaps and bounds, but yeah, disability attached to a negative, either to a negative characteristic or a negative phrase. Like there's a lot of those. So the one I tell a lot of people is blind spot. Now we all use it. Now you can use it in driving because you literally cannot see something. But when you're saying, oh, they've got a blind spot to that person, you're saying they can't see something about this person, and you're using it in like a negative way. Oh, I've had so many people push me back on this. I was like, no, you can use it when driving, but the sort of the inference of, you know, even saying tone deaf,
Yeah.
it's not, you know, you're saying that they're ignorant, or, I mean, even using the word ignorant, no, ignorance fine, stupid isn't. Again, stupid has a long history of being used. I mean, it was a legal term, I think, for disability for a long time, so it's never really okay, along with like imbecile and, well, we know the other words, I'm not going to say them, but they're not great. And there's no replacement for those words. It's just just don't use them, I think is the thing. But yeah, there's so many. And it's also, I mean, we do know, you know, if somebody in the room was blind and you knew they were, and you said blind spot, most people would go, oh. So we do know that we shouldn't actually say it. And the same when you're talking about someone being deaf or stupid, but use that terrible word, you know, like we know that they're not acceptable terms, and it's just giving that like, we don't get to use those words because we don't need them, like they don't need to be kept in circulation. But it is, you know, it is kind of undoing years of, you know, I mean, it's hard to change language, but you know, we can, and we have, and we do. So
yeah, I think I mean, I have definitely used those words, not realizing in phrases.
All the time.
I think, I mean,
all the time.
I was just like, wow, like to be able, one, like there is beauty in realizing that and being able to be like, that's an easy fix. Like, I can change that. I can be more aware of the phrases that I picked up when I was a child, most likely, just from watching movies and shows and being around people who grew up in a different generation and who were not aware of these types of things. Or if they were aware of them, they were fed these same narratives that we're talking about, which is then reinforcing the narratives that I don't necessarily believe, but the phrases are in my head as almost like you know, it's like a bad habit. And so so it's a matter of like realizing, oh, I'm doing that. Let me just like be conscious and, you know, talk a little bit slower, be a little bit more mindful. And it's okay if you mess up, but like, it's about being able to call yourself out or change it. You know, I said something earlier today and I was like, oh, that was not the right term. I apologize. I was talking to a friend of mine and I'm like, oh my gosh, what I meant was this. Sorry, I messed that up. That's not what I meant. And it was just like, it's the retraining and relearning. And, you know, there's, I don't know, like we were talking earlier about how some people have a hard time with wanting to change language or to like give up certain phrases.
And well, it's like that whole, you know, with the whole Me Too movement and guys going, oh, I don't know like what I can say anymore. I'm like, no, it's not really what this is about. It's not like, we're not wrong to be annoyed. Like you just don't do these things. Now you know it's a problem. Just, you know, like it's fine. You didn't know. I mean, you should have, but you didn't. And you know, I mean, with ableism, I do think there's a caveat to it in that we didn't always have a word for it. A lot of people don't know about it. I was saying to you earlier, it's not even in the German dictionary. So like, it's no one's fault that they don't know these things. And because the disabled community is still so hidden, that's why we don't know. You know, if you don't realize how common it is if you're not shown it, if we're not represented, which we aren't. I think disability has something like 2 to 3% representation in the media, despite being 20% of the global population. You know, 1 in 5 in the UK, 1 in 4 in America. That's quite a lot of people that are just, you know, and if we do show disability, it's usually like either an exaggerated one or a visible one. It's, you know, all the things in between. Like you were saying earlier, you know, disability is broad. I mean, I learn all the time different things, even different considerations for like there's always something else. There's always something really specific, even down to like one person might need something, and that one person should have access to that, I think, or it should be possible. So yeah, like it's massive. But I think the first thing is disabled isn't a bad word, like you were saying earlier. Disability isn't a bad word. Disability itself isn't the problem. It's society and how it reacts to disability that is the problem. Like, you know, we're not all moping around in our beds hating life. Don't get me wrong, we have bad days, but you know, we're also just living a life like everybody else. And disability has existed in humanity since humans have existed. You know, I mean, I look back and think on some of the things we used to do to humans, and you're just like, oh, we legit put wooden legs on people. oh, like, you know, and without, I mean, even when you look at prosthetics now and how far along they've come, but how like an ill-fitting prosthetic can cause untold problems. And you think just, God, people really had to just go around with, you know, a rough-hewn bit of, you know, and like we've come on, but that has all, you know, disability has always been a thing.
Yeah. And
Or we just, you know, we weren't living long enough to get some of the ones that you get when you're older. Like,
yeah,
just, you know, because
yeah.
it is kind of a, I mean, it shouldn't necessarily be the case, but it is kind of an understanding that if we are lucky enough to attain an older age, we're not going to have great mobility. Like, we all just kind of accept that as the norm. It shouldn't technically be, but it is now that we're living longer. And it's almost 50% of all older adults.
Yeah. It's also interesting because as you were talking about awareness and representation and not being hidden, and it coming back to your brand of Unhidden Clothing, like that is the power in having a clothing brand. Like, it is making this visible. It is someone who came from high street fashion. It is making this something that is, you know, worth talking about, something that is important, drawing attention to this stat of 20% of people. And it's not just people over a certain age, it is all people of all backgrounds, and it affects either you or someone you know. And so, like, to be able to talk about, you know, size inclusivity, body inclusivity, it being able to be customizable for, you know, the different like needs that you have, and being able to put something on, or, you know, whatever. I'm sure there's like a million. I can just imagine your process of the range of abilities, and like thinking, how can I solve this? Like, what is the creative idea in a way to help solve this with a piece of clothing and with a garment? And I'm sure like that would be an amazing documentary that I would love to watch. So if you ever do one, let me know. I'll be your first fan.
And now, like, I should film this.
Yeah, like just like thinking about that.
That's the thing, because you try, you know, you start with a design, and then you like, right, imagine this consideration, and then you're like, right, that's that overcome. Then this, okay, then that's that. Right, and then this, no, you can't, so you can't put that there, it has to go here. And, you know, it is, I mean, the thing is, it's more interesting, you know, like we're not reinventing, we kind of are, we're not reinventing the wheel here, you know, we're not going to have a new type of garment. So really all we're doing is making existing shapes work. But to do that, and obviously, I mean, I have a specific aesthetic, I suppose you'd say, and not everyone's going to like mine. So, you know, like that's why I actively encourage other people to become inclusive designers, because then everybody wins. But yeah, it is, I mean, it's just more fun. It's more interesting. Like, rather than designing a skirt that you just want to look pretty, imagine trying, you know, like the creative juggle that you have to do to sort of go, right, okay, what does this person need? And then try and help multiple people. I mean, it's not always possible within every garment to help every person. Actually, like maternity wear is basically adaptive wear. So we got so far and then just went, no, we're going to stop there. Just going to stop with swollen tummies. But yeah, like the trousers that I have, they're, you know, I mean, you know, that time of the month when you're on your period, like the fact that the fabric's a bit stretchy, you can adjust the front without flashing open your pants, and the back's elasticated, there's way more comfortable. And there's, you know, but there's still a pair of trousers at the end of the day. And because that wrap is intentionally made to look a bit like it's a style thing as well, like it's a nice elevated pair of trousers, but they're stretchy and they're comfortable.
Yeah.
Not very often we get to say that about trousers. You know, I'm happy with those. They fulfilled a need.
Okay, so I have one last question before we wrap up, because I know we're a little over time. What do you have a philosophy or mantra in the way in which you run your business, and in thinking about, it can be about accessibility, it could be about anything, but how are you thinking about building this company, and what's kind of like a something that kind of grounds you and that dictates how you're building this business and this brand to have this positive impact?
Gosh, that's hard. I mean, a lot of it is kind of just, I think we were saying earlier, just start. But I think when it comes to what I'm doing, a lot of it is, who does it help? So, you know, when I'm trying to think about content or how I'm writing it, like, who am I really trying to help? Because it's not, you know, it's not about making a profit. It's not about making a statement. It's, who is this ultimately going to help? And, like once you start, sort of questioning your own motives, and then you can see it with the design, like who's it going to help, right? People with wheelchairs. Why not people who are blind? Okay, how can you help them? And it just takes you on I find when I question my own motives as much as anything else, like, and who does it ultimately help? And then, then you can't help but think about who does it hurt. So then you hopefully, at least you can hold your hand up and say, yeah, this doesn't work for some people, but it'll work for others.
So I'm definitely going to borrow that and use it as inspiration as I start to build this too.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Victoria. This was an amazing conversation. I'm really energized and inspired right now.
Awesome.
It's only 5:30 here, so I feel like I can use my energy. It's a little bit later for you.
Yeah,
so.
I'm like, cool. Yeah, that's late, but it's okay.
Well, thank you so much, and I'll definitely keep in touch.
Awesome. And I look forward, thanks for having me.